All right, Kevin back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I am here with Rich Schefren. Rich, welcome. So awesome to have you, man.
Excited to be here, Kevin, and thanks for inviting me.
You bet. I'll tell you, you and I, we have been running in the same circles for years. We've got lots of mutual and that close mutual friends. I mean, you and I most recently we were connected because Joe Fire, host of Hustle and Flowchart podcast, connected us and said, Rich, you should really let Kevin interview for his podcast. But we've got lots of other close friends too and stuff, and so it is. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. And so what I'd like to do is just kind of start off is, set a little bit of context here. We'll start off, I'll turn it over to you to share a little bit about, what you're doing right now these days, who you're serving, what inspires you most about the work that you're doing. And we'll just kind of start there, Rich.
All right. Well, I still do, I guess, what I started doing about 20 some odd years ago, which is help online businesses grow. So I've been doing that for 21 years, right? I think I was the first online business coach, right? I got a reputation for being a business coach because I coached Russell Brunson and Ryan Dice, and I coached a lot of people like early on in their business development. And nowadays, what I spend my time on is my company has a core product. It's called Steal Our Winners. And what we do is we publish 2 strategies a week that are currently crushing it online that most people don't know about. And that I spend Mondays and Fridays on. And then Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, I work with my private clients. I have a bunch of coaching and consulting clients that I work with privately. And oftentimes I'm taking strategies that I share in Steal Our Winners, but putting them into place in my clients' businesses. Because what I discovered, maybe about 10 years ago, was that when I looked at the successes that I've had personally, the successes that I've helped my clients have, what is a common thread was capitalizing on a marketing strategy or tactic early in its life cycle where it's most powerful. And so what I wanted to do was kind of formalize that into something that would be a steady pipeline of those kinds of ideas for myself and my clients. And if I'm going to do that, I might as well get paid for it. So that's where Steal Our Winners came from. And, but, even my best testimonial, right, which is from Agora, I have $1 billion testimonial from them, helping them grow from about 150 million to over 1 billion. And that was because I brought them the VSL back in 2008, and immediately, response rates skyrocketed for them, 400% in the US, 300% in France, 250% in Germany, et cetera, right? And so that's the power of the right tactic at the right moment. Yeah. And I'm just a big believer in that these days. So it's fun because I guess on Mondays and Fridays, people who have discovered something are excited to share it with me, and I'm excited to learn it. So Mondays and Fridays are always fun days. And then Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, I'm helping people solve problems because I'd say about 90% of the coaching and consulting I do is generally when the business could be better. Generally, people don't call me when business is fantastic, although that sometimes happens, but that's 1 out of 10. Generally, it's because there's a challenge or a problem.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
that's how I spend my time these days.
Wow, what a unique model, Rich, where you are just having all these conversations with all these entrepreneurs who are just the strategies that are working best for them. Right. And like you said, that just keeps you on the cutting edge, serving your clients as well. I mean, what a great synergy that is. And, providing value to people on both ends of the equation and stuff. And
and, it's, I guess, appropriate, especially for a podcast like this. I feel very fortunate that I can have this product. I mean, we have over 200 contributors, and, a lot of that comes down to what I have an appreciation for, especially the last couple of years, is how much my reputation like helps me, right? Like I never, growing up as a kid, like my grandfather said, like, protect our name, that really didn't mean anything to me back then. But now as an adult, I truly recognize the importance of relationships, of not burning bridges, of that your reputation precedes you. And I reap the rewards of that on a pretty consistent basis. And I just am super grateful that I didn't mess anything up like I could have done in my 20s, 30s, or 40s.
Yeah, yeah. And it's you bring up such an important point, because you have been focused, like me, we've both been focused on creating valuable relationships for a long time, and when people around us know our intention, and they just know, there's two kinds of trust, and they're both present. There's trust in our character and trust in our competence. And when we have both of those trusts, whether when we have those two trusts in somebody else, all of a sudden now there's zero friction and stuff can just happen, and it can happen very quickly. And the same thing when people have those two trusts in us, stuff happens like now, because it's that lack of trust that's always the friction that slows stuff down. And by the same token, none of us are perfect. I know for a fact I've dropped the ball before, not intentionally, but because we have these relationships with people and they know our intention, they also will extend us a little bit of grace too when we are just human,
Yes.
and it does not damage the relationship. In fact, it will further the relationship. And so huge points. Well, okay, so now that we've got the context set, I'm gonna reiterate the question for the benefit of the listeners. So, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And Rich, I am just really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of most valuable relationships.
Yeah, I thought about this a lot, and I wonder how many other people you've interviewed have the same issue. There's really a lot of people. There's a lot of people that I really would not be here today if it wasn't for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Certainly in my childhood, there were things I got to experience that made a huge impact on me, right? So like, just not to spend too much time on this because this is not really the point, but there was a gentleman by the name of Dominic Cataldo. He was in the Gambino crime family. He took me under his wing when I was a kid. And they were fixing horse races at Yonkers Raceway and the Meadowlands and Belmont. And they were in the book Wise Guys, which is the book, or the movie was Wise Guys. The book was by Henry Hill. They were in the book, they weren't in the movie.
Okay.
That was like my early teenage years, and then my very first job. So that was, Dominic had a big influence on me, and I guess like kind of just him and my dad kind of made their own rules in life, and I think I certainly kind of absorbed that kind of like society is going to bend to me kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Next, though, my very first after-school job was at Investor Center, which is where Jordan Belfort got his start. Okay. I was actually working there when they hired him. In The Wolf of Wall Street, they have him go into a shopping mall. That's supposed to be it. It was in an office building, wasn't in a shopping mall. But that impacted me. No offense to anyone in there, but like how sleazy that was, and like how I thought these people were separating, innocent people from their money, and how sleazy I thought that was, even though this was a more honest kind of like undertaking. And so that impacted me too later on in life. So, because I never wanted to be like that, right? And later on, when I had my hypnosis business, it occurred to me, our primary thing was weight loss. And we had, our last year, we closed after 9/11, like a year after that, because 9/11 really impacted us. But like in 2001, we did $13 million. And the majority of that was weight loss. And it occurred to me, and most people don't stick with the program long enough to get the full result, right? Mm-hmm. And it occurred to me that if you took all my weight loss clients and you put them into a room and they hung out for an hour and then I had to go into that room, like I might not want to go into that room. And that kind of reminded me of like Investor Center and that. And it was like, I never want to be in a business like this ever again. And it's kind of funny. A lot of coaching programs have group Q&As. I don't know if I was the first to like do one of those, but I did that starting in like 2003, right? And the reason I did that was I wanted to recreate that room for myself. I wanted a place where all my clients were, right? That I'd never be afraid to go to, right? That they'd always be happy to see me. And I'd have to answer honestly to one client while other clients listen, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, but I'd say that those were impactful in my youth, and they certainly kind of had a ripple effect as I got older. Yep. But I'd say that the people that have made the biggest difference in my life, period, would be probably 4 people. Todd Brown, okay. Which I'll circle back, Mark Ford, Jay Abraham, and Clayton Makepeace. So Clayton Makepeace has passed, but he was a legendary copywriter and a super sweetheart of a guy, and someone who made a dramatic impact on me and my writing, which I guess at the end of the day, my writing has caused more of my success than anything else. So sure. Certainly Clayton deserves some credit there. And let me get Todd out of the way first, and then I'll go back to Mark and Jay. Okay. Todd Brown was, he won a contest of mine, like when I released the manifesto. He then became like for a business makeover, and then he became a client of mine. Then he came in actually when his business was thriving, and he worked on my team and was like my marketing director. So we worked together for a long time. And then he went out and did his own thing, right? And to this day, I consider him one of my closest friends. And when I was in therapy, I don't know, over a decade ago. And one of the hard things that I had to get was that you could be valuable without doing anything, like as a person, like as a human, right? Like that I always defaulted to doing things for people to be valuable, right? Like I didn't equate the idea that just my presence in and of itself could bring value, right? And that was like, my therapist had me think about that, and I did. And it wasn't until like one day when Todd Brown came over that I got it. Because Todd doesn't have to do anything, and Todd's presence makes me happier, right? Like him as a person. And it was that model of Todd and my relationship with Todd that I could use in therapy to understand the concept, right? That you don't have to do anything to be valuable. Yeah. Not that he doesn't do anything, does lots of things, but even if he didn't do any of those things, I'd still want to be around him and still get a lot of joy from that. But my 2 primary mentors have been Mark Ford and Jay Abraham, and you really couldn't have 2 better mentors, 2 legends, each in their own right. Mark Ford also goes by Michael Masterson, who wrote Ready, Fire, Aim and all those books, and also one of the founders of Agora. And Jay Abraham is Jay Abraham, right? And what's really interesting to me is how different they are, and how much I learned by the difference, as opposed to by each of them. So I noticed early on that when I brought new ideas to Mark, he was rather uninterested in new ideas. Like, why do that when you already know what works? And when I brought a new idea to Jay, he would almost drop everything to hear the new idea, right? And it always fascinated me, why, I knew where to go if I had a new idea. I'd go to Jay, right? He'd ask me a million questions, and it would be a better idea because of those questions. And then I kind of like thought about it a lot, and I realized that like, and I ran it by both of them and they agreed, like Mark just sees business as like a vehicle, like for his life, right? Like it powers everything, right? But it isn't everything. Whereas Jay looks at business as everything. So Jay is all business all the time. His friendships revolve around business. And if he's going to have any variety in life, then the variety has to happen in his business because he's all business pretty much all the time. Mark is not business all the time. Business is just the gateway to everything else, right? So Mark is a world champion in jiu-jitsu. He's written books on poetry. He has a big palm tree nursery here. He has he's building a museum on Central art, like on Central American art. Like he's a true Renaissance man, right? And certainly like my proclivity is more towards Jay. I'll work all the time. But like having seen this difference and who has more enjoyment out of life and who has a bigger circle of friends, and certainly Mark. And so I've always tried to kind of be as much like Mark as I can be, cultivating friendships outside of work, cultivating, right, all these kinds of things so that I would live more of that life than the other. But I'll also tell you something that was something with Jay, and there was, I don't want to say the other person's name just because like I don't have nice things to say.
Okay.
But I had this copywriter work for me when I did the manifesto launch. Like when I had my biggest moment in the sun, right? I had this copywriter work for me. And he didn't fulfill his end of the bargain. I ended up having to do a lot more writing than he was like, he ended up taking on a client right at the time of the launch. And so it was problematic. And I mentioned to him that we're going to have to adjust the payment on this, but we didn't iron that out. And that's my bad. And so, this is a copywriter that generally made like 3,000, 5,000, maybe like one time got paid 10,000, right? And, but if he was getting 5% of cash collected, right, he would have gotten 150,000 because I collected over 3 million. And I gave him 50,000, which I thought was being overly generous for the amount of work that he actually did. He thought I was not, right?
Okay.
And he made and so at my moment in the sun, he dedicated a ridiculous amount of his time, effort, and energy to try and hurt me, which he was ineffective on, right? And because of that, like I literally got asked for recommendations for copywriters on a daily basis back then. And I could have sent him a world of business, but I didn't, right? I had a similar issue with Jay at one point, the other way, right? I felt like Jay owed me money. Jay did not feel like he owed me money. And like, I certainly would have liked to have had the money. There's not a question of that, right? But the relationship with Jay is a lot more important to me than the amount of money. It was like 40 grand. And I knew, or I thought, I don't know, right? I thought that like, I need to give Jay a way out of this, or this could cause friction later on, even if it's not any friction for me, because if he has any guilt, remorse, whatever, like maybe it shows up in some self-destructive way in our relationship. And so like, I made him an offer like, hey, Jay, I think you owe me 40. I know that you don't feel like you do. How about we do this, right? And what it was I just sold this new program same time, right? As I was having the other problem with this other person. I just sold this program. Let me buy 1,000 of the Mr. X books at cost from the printer. I'll give them to all my new clients. I'll tell them it's my favorite marketing book. So you'll get props for that and they'll all be exposed to you. I'll let them know that it's a $400 book, but I'm only paying a couple dollars for, right? And so it'll be props to me and I can use it because we had to build the first e-learning drip platform. And so like that didn't exist. So in the beginning, when we launched our coaching program, we were actually using a forum and opening up threads like each month, in the beginning, right? So getting people a gift helped tide them over. But like, since that time that we did that with Jay in 2006, I've literally made millions upon millions of dollars in my relationship with Jay, right? this copywriter, to this day, still tries to hurt me, right? Whatever. But he missed out on like I could have sent him millions of dollars worth of business, and I would have, if he, instead of making it like me being his vendetta, right? If he would have just said, hey man, I think you owe me 150. I get that you think you owe me 50. Why don't you, if you can, when you can, how you can, if you can throw $100,000 worth of business to me to make up for it, I'd really appreciate it. And then that would have been a very different conversation, right? Totally. And so like I am, and I'm constantly amazed personally, and maybe you have even some wisdom on this, especially having a podcast on like impactful relationships. I'm just always amazed at how many people like will hold on to being right. Like at the collateral damage of ruining a relationship. Like, and I never get it. Like I to this day, I still don't get it. Like if the words "I'm sorry" are like, can mend a relationship, and yet an unwillingness to say that, I'm not suggesting that like every relationship should be looked at like dollar and cents and added up, but if you did, you would probably never like burn a bridge. And I just, I do you have any insight on that? Because I value relationships so much, right?
You just shared some pretty damn valuable insight right there. I mean, if you didn't make a case for it right there, I don't know what would make a case for it. But I've had people, I can count on one hand the number of relationships in my life that like I have now, they're not in place because of something like what you just shared. So I haven't had many of them, but it's I feel it's always been short-sighted on their part because, and what hurt, so I can think of one in particular, and the same thing, I'm not going to mention who it was because it doesn't matter.
Right.
But, we had a falling out, and what hurt me most was not the money. I could give a rip of that. It was that this person wasn't who I thought they were, and I was like, man, we could have done so much together, And now we're not going to get the opportunity to do that, And it wasn't even just us, because when people like us, Rich, who we do put such a value on relationships, and those, there's a question I ask, and I'm going to try to not seed this, but the impact that has come from you and Jay, for example, how many millions of people have been impacted because of the relationship that you and Jay have had all these years? A lot, a lot. And the other gentleman who was more short-sighted, not only did he miss out personally, but man, so much could have come from that. So much could have come from that, and more lives could have been impacted. More people could have been impacted and stuff. And revenue is the byproduct of that. And
yes, very much so. No doubt. And the way I look at it is, I would much rather be the nice guy up front, and if it's not reciprocated, it's not reciprocated, right? But like, no skin off my back. Like, invest in people first. And, as we were talking, there's probably one other person I should mention. And I know, like I've already mentioned 4, so it's a lot, but there's one other person. And if I thought long and hard about it, I probably would have 100 more people. So I won't do that. But, Mike Filsaime.
This would be a really long.
Yeah. Mike Filsaime was another very special person, because he was the only person that was willing to speak from stage about me when I was coaching privately, right? So I was coaching all these gurus, but I was a big secret. And Mike was the only one that was like, oh, my coach, Rich Schefren, is in the room. Like, stand up, Rich, right? Like,
Wow.
and he was the only person, right, that did that. And the only reason I wrote the manifesto was that he told me that if I wrote something and like to use for affiliates, he would mail it out to his affiliates and tell them to mail for me. And at that moment in time, like, you know, he had like the second biggest launch at that moment. Like, it was John Reese and then it was him. And he had it with all, like, without the A-level gurus, you could say, with all the B and C's, right? And so that document changed my life, right? My life was never the same after I wrote it. And if it wasn't for him, I don't know that I would have wrote it. And so, like, he definitely belongs on my Mount Rushmore. I mean, he's still a close friend to this day. But, you know, it's funny too, right? Like, because to him, that was no big deal. I mean, that's just who he is, right? But it was also no big deal. To me, it was a huge deal. And in hindsight, an even bigger deal, because it really totally changed my life, right? Yeah, totally. And you know, and all it was him, like, I was being a good friend and like convincing me to do something that I probably should have done. And yeah, so I've been very fortunate though. And I have to assume it's because I guess deep down I'm a loner. And so I want to be connected to more people. So I walk into every like relationship wanting to like form a friendship, right? Like, that's my goal. I mean, it's not, you know, and I you know, and some friends I talk to like all the time. And then we have some mutual friends like Michael Cage, who, like, you know, he can disappear off the face of the earth for like a year and then pop back out. And it's like no time has passed. So,
That's right.
you know, I'm fortunate. I have a bunch of friends like that. Like, I know if I ever have a problem, I can reach out to Michael Cage and he'll get back to me right away. But like, we might not talk that frequently. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, and even like, I would say I'm at a part of I'm in a season of my life that, like, nowadays I much more look to and enjoy more collaborations than even like on anything, right? Than working by myself, because like, I just enjoy people and I enjoy getting other people's perspectives, and I learn more about myself around other people than I ever learn about myself alone. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, right? Like, you know, I can't maybe you've heard this before. I've heard this, but I can't remember it exactly. Someone was explaining like their idea of heaven was that like, was like, I guess the best analogy that I can make, which is not that good, was kind of like, you know, existing in the minds of other people. And like, you know, is that a good existence or a bad existence, like multiplied? Like, when the world thinks about you, how do they think about you? And I've always tried to live my life in a way, both professionally and personally, that leaves people better off because we connected in a short time or a long time, than had we not, right? And, you know, I think for like some of my most successful clients, they would have been successful anyway. I'd like to think I helped get them there maybe a little bit faster than they would have on their own, but I think they would have gotten there anyway. And even like a Q&A call, like just kind of showing up and creating a space for people, for them to kind of figure out what's their business path, like what's the best next decision, those kinds of things. It's just invaluable. And you know, I have a girlfriend that I've been with for the last 12 years. And she was like a super heavyweight, big deal at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. And she retired about 5 years ago. And now she's doing Airbnbs, right? And she's got quite a few houses and she's rented them and stuff. And like, but it's a grind for her. And I remember like maybe 6 months ago, like me talking to her about like, you really need to go to an event. You got to go to an event and you got to meet other people who are in the space just like you. Because like for me, when I first got online, like back in 2000, 2001, until I met some people, like it was a grind, because every day I woke up alone, walked over to my desk and sat alone in front of my computer, like for countless hours. And then the end of the day, like went back to bed. If I even went to sleep, maybe I worked through the night and stuff like that. And so it just was like a drag, right? And then as soon as I went to my first event and I met some friends, like who were also trying to do the same thing that I was doing, that I could like connect with during the day, like what I'm working on, what they're working on, all of a sudden, like it became less lonely. It became less of a drag, right? And that was my advice to my girlfriend. Like, you got to go to an event so that when you go downstairs and you get in front of your computer, you're not now alone for the next 9 hours. There's other people who are trying to do the same thing that you're doing, and you can like get ideas from them. You can commiserate with them. Like there's a whole, like you need a support system that's very much geared towards what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And, COVID kind of put like a clamp on that for a while, but now everything's back open again. And I just, if you don't have a strong circle, then I think, it's a recipe to struggle.
Yeah.
If not now, later, right? Like, but at some point. And I've been extremely fortunate. And, we had an event like about 3 years ago here in Delray. I did a 24-hour live stream. It was, I had done a live stream. I had done a 24-hour live stream before. I did it in 2008, but I did that one by myself. This one I did with other people, and every half an hour there was a different person. So we had about 50 people. And I was just amazed at how many people were willing to fly in because I asked.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And really blown away. Right. Russell Brunson chartered a private jet, people came from all over. And, I don't have very many things like that. Like, it's hard to know where you stand with people. Like, I've never taken a poll, but knowing that this event was important to me, a lot of people made it important to them.
Yeah.
And, if that's not a good barometer of like where you stand with people,
that's a heck of a
I don't know what is, right?
Yeah.
And, I just, I would imagine it's not the people that are listening to this or show up for interviews. I would imagine most people here get it, but it's mind-boggling to me how many people don't get it. Yeah. Just how important it is. If Jay and Mark didn't take me under their wing, I certainly wouldn't be here. If Todd wasn't a close friend, I also wouldn't be here. If Mike Filsaime wasn't a close friend, I wouldn't be here. And all the other people that like have existed in my life, which I'm sure I'm forgetting tons of them. I've had lots of money and felt alone, and that's horrible. Yeah. I'd rather be broke with a bunch of friends than super rich and all by myself any day of the week. And I've had lots of money and I've had no money, and I've had lots of friends and I've had no friends. So I've sampled it all. And, I certainly feel as if, it can't be any clearer than my whole business now relies on the contributions from others. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. What a huge distinction right there. And they're happy to contribute, Yeah. I know you asked me, the last time we spoke, if I would be willing to do that. And I'm like, man, this would be such a cool opportunity, because the right entrepreneurs, I'll back up to Michael Cage is just such a great example. That guy taught me how to do
one of the smartest guys I know.
And that guy has had such a profound impact on my life. And there was a season of my life where him and we were talking every single week. I was investing in his help, and I grew, and my business grew exponentially during that time. And I have got so much respect for that guy. And you're right. You know, I've still got his number. We have not talked. Well, we talked last year. Him and I hopped on Zoom last year after probably not talking or seeing each other for 7 or 8 years, you know.
Yeah.
And his wife, Michelle, had passed away in the interim. I found out through a mutual friend that his wife had passed away. I didn't know. And so I texted him during that time, and he just had a lot of stuff going on, and we didn't get to connect. But about a year ago, we hopped on Zoom and got to, and I'll tell you, you know, Michael used to be, back when I was working with him, a heavier set guy.
Yep.
And when I saw him on Zoom, I was like, dang, I'm
yeah.
like, you lost a ton of weight, man. You look great. But, and even though we had not spoke or seen each other in like 7 or 8 years, we picked up that conversation just like it was yesterday. And that is the power of relationships. And, you know, I have long believed that as entrepreneurs, relationships are the most valuable asset we possess. Everything else stems from that. And like you, I'd, you know, you can have money, you can have relationships, you know, you can have, I place the value on relationships, and you know, our lives, they go through cycles. Our businesses, they go through cycles, but the relationships, I mean, those relationships, the right ones, they're there, and they're there for the long term, you know. And so I'm going to ask one question, and you, if you look, so you've mentioned your relationships with Todd, with Mark, with Jay, with Clayton, with Mike. You've talked about all 5 of these gentlemen, but if you look at just any one of these relationships, just one relationship, and recall, and you kind of shared one with you and Mike, and that relationship led to the manifesto being created, and him inspiring you to do that, and everything changed there. But, you know, and maybe you want to expand on that or what have you, but where because of this relationship, a huge impact was able to be made that, you know, hands down would have never happened if not for this relationship, for your relationship with this person. I know you kind of, you know, alluded to the manifesto.
Yeah, well, I would say, like, yeah, the Mike Filsaime one definitely, but I would also say the J one precedes that, right? So the very first time that I ever like spoke on stage was when Jay Abraham and I were doing a coaching program together, right?
Okay.
Like, and it was a fulfillment of, right? But then the very first time that I pitched was at a Stephen Pierce event. Stephen Pierce was partners with Jay and I in this coaching program, and then Jay and Stephen had a falling out, and I was the low man on the totem pole. I was just trying to, like, keep everyone together, right? But so as fulfillment for the final coaching program, we did it at one of Stephen's events, and it was a pitch event, so I had to pitch, right?
Okay.
And I pitched my coaching program, which didn't exist at that time, right? Like, and it was my association with Jay that gave me credibility in that room. Right? So it was my credibility with Jay at that moment that got me Russell Brunson, Ryan Dice, Mike Filsaime, right? Like all those guys, right? And so, yeah, like I don't know if I would have gotten Mike if it wasn't for Jay.
Okay.
Right. And then, you know, Mike helped with the manifesto, right? Which then got me Todd, because Todd read the manifesto and he had never seen anything like that. Right. So they all kind of backed up on one another. And you know, I'll tell you just one other really interesting story. Like, so I met Jay because Jay was having I had bought some of his products, and he was running like a special where instead of paying him his $5,000 an hour, you could pay it over time.
Okay.
And you could either buy 2 hours or 4 hours, and you'd pay $1,000 a month until it was paid off.
Okay.
Right. I did 4 hours. I a friend of mine did 2 hours and he did it on the phone, right? I did it in person. I did 4 hours. Jay and I hit it off. And then on the third, and I put it on my American Express card. And in the third month, my American Express card got turned off. Because of the hypnosis company and stuff. So now he was getting declines, and now like he had gotten paid $3,000, but he was owed $17,000.
Okay.
And he would call me all the time trying to get the money. And I was like, Jay, you like, let me get back on my feet. You'll be the first I pay, I promise. But like, I need, right. And he would call me and be like, does your wife have like a handbag? I was thinking about getting my wife like a Gucci handbag. Maybe you want to send me one of your wife's, or like, or does you have a car, right? Maybe you want to send me that. Like he called me with all these weird kind of requests. But then I wrote my very first sales letter, got back on my feet, and everything was like financially okay. And I was invited to a Mark Joyner, like one of his final events back in California. And so I decided to go, and I decided to stop at Jay's office and drop off a check, right, for the $17,000. This was like maybe another 2 months later or 3 months later. So now, like, instead of him waiting 2 years to get paid, he's going to get it all actually way ahead of time. Mm-hmm. He wasn't there, but I left him the check, right? Just saying, like, I told you that you wouldn't have to wait, that I just need to get on my feet. Here's the check, like, you're now paid in full. Mm-hmm. And he called me and thanked me. Apologized for bothering me, but just said that, like, in general, when someone ends up getting declined, he never gets that money. And that if I ever do anything interesting to reach, like, that he might find interesting, reach out. And that was the beginning of my, like, my partnership with Jay, really. Like, a year later, I brought him online, and it wouldn't have happened probably if there wasn't a problem, and then I made it right, you know? Yeah. And so even in the mess ups, right? Like, it's just about a question of character more than anything else, you know? Yeah. And, you know, and it's unfortunate too, because I think that, while there are a lot of good people in our industry, it's a sleazy industry for the, like, overall, in my opinion. There are a lot of people that are not good character, that make big promises and don't fulfill it to their clients and to their partners, right? And yeah, definitely don't ever want to be part of that contingent, right? Yeah, you can be honorable even in a dishonorable trade, I guess, even though it's not dishonorable, but you know, it stands out. And, you know, like, you've been around a long time. I've been around a long time. I've seen a lot of people come and go. I've seen a lot of people who made a lot of money, and then 2 years later, they were working for someone else. Just because, like, things catch up to you, and it's the long game. And the short game, a lot of people can get pretty far pretty fast by stepping on people, but it doesn't last. And the people that you stepped on the way up will not be there to help you, as everyone eventually needs help. And so yeah, just always try to do the right thing, always try to leave people in a better place, and be willing to I guess to see things through other people's perspective, I guess, is the other one, right? Like, it's always easy to know how it feels on this end, but you don't know what's going on the other end. Right. And being appreciative of that, I think, is somewhat great skill for marketing, but also a great skill for having friendships.
That's right. That's right. Well, Rich, man, you packed a lot in. I'm so appreciative of you right now in this conversation and all that you shared here. And because, man, that was some great stuff for sure. And, you know, I look at all that's come from just hosting this podcast, and you know, we've been able to, man, it just keeps getting better, you know, that just inspiring. You know, my goal was always twofold. I wanted to give entrepreneurs like you the opportunity to share your story and your experience around your most valuable relationships, and just and be able to honor those relationships. And then on the other side, for the listeners, I wanted these conversations to just inspire them to go out there and place an intentional focus on creating more real, meaningful, rewarding, and profitable relationships in their own life. And man, thanks to you, Rich, we definitely delivered on that today. So thank you for your
Awesome.
role in that. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
For anybody listening to this, go, I'm sure there's people listening to this that they don't know you yet,
Awesome.
but they're going, dang, Kev, I really like Rich, man. I like the way Rich shows up. I'd love to how can they find out more about what you guys are doing, Rich?
Strategicprofits.com. That's probably the best place.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm up on social media, but probably our website, Strategic Profits, would be the best place for sure.
Okay, perfect. Any last thing you want to share before we call it a wrap?
There's another quick story that just real quick that just to kind of illustrate the point of like being willing to invest in people first, and it could be small things, but so my ex-wife, who I met, who I was married to, she used to manage a cigar bar in New York. A friend of mine owned it, and that's how I met her. So I used to go there all the time, right, to pick her up and stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. And one time I went, and there was this big, I don't know, 350 pounds, he was a big guy, like big black guy, sitting at the bar with me, or sitting at the bar, and I started talking to him and whatever, and I asked him if he wanted a cigar because I had a box with my cigars, and I gave him, and he's like, I'd love a cigar. So I went and got one. And I went to my box and I gave him a Romeo and Juliet Churchill. It's a Cuban cigar, right? And comes in a steel canister. And I gave it to him. And it turns out that this guy was someone substantial. I'll tell you who he was in a second. But that his mentor had given him the same cigar. So this was like a sign for him, right? So this guy, his name was George Jackson, and he was in New York he had produced movies like Crush Groove, the first rap movie, and New Jack City. And he was in New York because he had just become the CEO of Motown. And so after I gave him that cigar, he thought it was like a sign that he needed to spend more time with me. My girlfriend and I, when we're then going to this bar, we went to this bar and called Moomba. Moomba had like 3 floors. 2 were restaurant. The 3rd floor was like for VIPs. And my store was like the hot store in the city. So I was able to go to that. So I brought him. We walk in, Herbie Hancock's daughter is there. That's his goddaughter, right? Wow. And so this was like another sign to George that like, he's supposed to be close with me because his first day in the city, and I'm like, I gave him a cigar that his mentor gave him. I'm taking him to a place, his goddaughter's there, right? And George helped me start a music label. I went to his wedding, which like Stevie Wonder was playing, I was at a table full of all celebrities. It was really fun. Unfortunately, I went to his funeral a year later, a cocaine overdose. But that all started from just giving a guy a cigar that I didn't know, right? And I've had so many experiences like that. It totally could have been possible. He had no idea that was a good cigar, smoked it, left, whatever. And I'm sure I have a ton of stories like that. But for whatever reason, it meant something to him. And then that became a friendship. I guess about 8 months later, they opened up the resort in the Bahamas, Paradise Island. Okay. So the grand opening of that. And my dad was invited because he was a high roller, right? So when they opened it, they had about 100 or 2, maybe 300 high rollers, and they had about 1,500 celebrities. And the 2 were apart, right? A-level celebrities, Michael Jackson, Leonardo DiCaprio, Julia Roberts, Oprah, Michael Jordan, and I'm walking in the hallway walking in the lobby, the hall, and I walk right by George, and George is like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, I'm here with my dad. He's a high roller, right? And his assistant was next to him, and he's like, make sure Rich and his whole party gets into all of our events, right? And Yeah, so that that night, there used to be a restaurant called the Five Twins. It's now Nobu, like at Paradise Island. And it was a private party. We went in, right? Because George got us on the West. I ended up meeting this woman, Jamie Foster Brown. She is the biggest Black gossip columnist. She has a magazine called Sister to Sister. And George introduced me to her. She liked me. And then she's like, who do you want to meet here? And I'm like, I want to meet Michael Jordan. I want to meet Michael Jackson. I want to meet Oprah. And she walked me around and introduced me to all these people, and all from that cigar in that bar, right? Like, it launched a record company for me. That was like an international record company, made me a lot of money. Like, I have pictures with all these celebrities that I will never forget, right? Like, because my life is generally not like that. I don't get to hang with celebrities. And yeah, and it just all became because like I was just generous in a moment with someone I didn't know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've had so many stories like that. And I think if people don't have any stories like that, maybe it's because they're not investing in others first.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Wow. What a powerful share that was. And you're right, you know, that when we do invest in others and when we do show up from this place of contribution and service and just trying to be helpful,
Yeah.
so much comes from, I mean, stuff that, you know, whatever, I mean, I never go into a conversation with any expectations other than I just expect something really cool is going to come from this. And I can tell you, like what you just gave such great examples, you could have never envisioned that. No, it's impossible. No. You could have never, but look at all that came from, like you said, one cigar, given one cigar to one guy, and look at all that came from that, you know, and yeah, powerful, powerful stuff. Rich, thank you so much for taking.
Thank you for having me.
Have this conversation. I really appreciate it and excited to share this because I know we're going to inspire a lot of entrepreneurs who get to hear.
Very cool. Yeah, we'll definitely send it out to our list too, for sure.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again, Rich. Appreciate you, man.
Appreciate you too.